Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paskachari Satarine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th Canto, Chapter 5, and we left off text 13, so this is text 14. And these are Lord Rishabhdeva's instructions to his sons. And Rishabhdeva is an incarnation of Krishna. And his rule at the time, this goes back almost to the beginning of the universe, in his rule, the citizens, everything was so ideal. Everyone had everything they needed. There was no want, because they had personality of Godhead directly managing the affairs of government. Is an expansion of the Lord, Rishabhdeva. But he's preparing to turn all of that management over to his sons, who are also great devotees. And he's instructing his sons for the benefit of everyone. We get to hear those valuable instructions directly from the personality of Godhead. Just like when the Lord appeared as Krishna, appeared as his original form, Krishna, and he instructed Arjuna for the benefit of everyone. So the Lord here as Rishabhdeva, he's instructing his sons for the benefit of everyone. And he's advising him in how to manage the citizens so everything runs smoothly. And he's advising them about the dangers of material illusion, becoming entangled, and how to remain free from entanglement. Now these are managers. Okay, managers have to come in contact with everything, really. And they are in household life, so they have their own personal families. And so it's very important to remain Krishna conscious while performing those duties and activities. And he's explaining how to do that and the importance of taking shelter of saintly persons and Mahatmas, Paramahamsas, self-realized souls that keep one in the devotional line, not get carried away by Maya. So, text 14. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. As I have advised you, my dear sons, you should act accordingly. Be very careful. By these means you will be freed from the ignorance of the desire for fruitive activity, and the knot of bondage in the heart will be completely severed. For further advancement, you should also give up the means, that is, should not be attached to the process of liberation itself. Prabhupada's commentary. The process of liberation is Brahma Jigyasa, the search for the absolute truth. Generally, Brahma Jigyasa is called Neti Neti, the process by which one analyzes existence to search out the absolute truth. This method continues as long as one is not situated in his spiritual life. Spiritual life is Brahmabhuta, self-realized state. In the words of Bhagavad Gita, Brahmabhuta prasanatma nasochati nakangshati samaksaveshu bhuteshu madbhaktim labhate param. One who is thus transcendentally situated at once realizes Supreme Brahman, becomes fully joyful. He never laments nor desires to have anything. He's equally disposed to every living entity. In that state, he attains pure devotional service unto me. The idea is to enter into the para bhakti, transcendental devotional service of the Supreme Lord. To attain this, one must analyze one's existence. But when one is actually engaged in devotional service, he should not bother seeking out knowledge. By simply engaging in devotional service undeviatingly, one will always remain in the liberated condition. Mam chayo vyavicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samatityaitan brahmabhuyaya kalpate. Bhagavad Gita. The unflinching execution of devotional service is itself Brahmabhuta. Another important feature in this connection is anena yogena yatapotesham. The instructions received from the spiritual master must be followed immediately. One should not deviate from or surpass the instructions of the spiritual master. One should not be simply intent on consulting books, but should simultaneously execute spiritual master's order. Yato padesham. Mystic power should be achieved to enable one to give up material conception, but when one actually engages in devotional service, one does not need to practice the mystic yoga system. The point is, one can give up the practice of yoga, but devotional service cannot be given up. As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam, even those who are liberated, Atmarama, must always engage in devotional service. One may give up the practice of yoga when one is self-realized, but at no stage can one give up devotional service. All other activities for self-realization, including yoga and philosophical speculation, may be given up, but devotional service must be retained at all times. Point here is that in the search for the absolute truth, there is a search for knowledge and a lot of study and perhaps austerities, different procedures that one goes through to in the search for the absolute truth. Analyzing. It's not this, it's not that. I'm not exactly sure what it is. We know what it isn't by analyzing. And that's called Brahma Jigyasa, searching for the absolute truth. One is on the path to transcendence. However, when one engages in devotional service to the Lord, and that devotional service is available through the devotees. So by the mercy of a devotee of the Lord, one engages in devotional service, and there are different processes of devotional service, devotional activities. Hearing is one, chanting is another, remembering, offering prayers to the Lord, that's devotional service, worshiping the Lord. serving the Lord's lotus feet and serving the Lord, making friends with the Lord, and offering everything, oneself, to the Lord. So those are actually devotional service. So when one engages in those activities, the activities of devotional service, the other processes are not necessary anymore. They serve no purpose, because devotional service to the Lord is the absolute truth. Devotional service to the Lord is non-different from the Lord. Only by undivided devotional service can I be understood as I am, standing before you. That's the Lord's words to Arjuna. So devotional service is the goal. To be engaged in devotional service is what the person is searching for. Searching for the absolute truth. Well, the absolute truth is devotional service to the Lord. In the Holy Dham, you hear the devotees there. They're saying, Jai Radhe, Jai Radhe, Jai Radhe, Jai Radhe. So, Jai Radhe, she's the embodiment of devotional service to the Lord. There's no separation. Cannot separate devotional service from the Lord. And the Lord never appears alone. He always appears with his devotee. The Lord's never alone. He's always with a devotee, or devotees, or associates. He can't be separated from devotional service. So to attain devotional service is to attain the Lord. So when one engages in devotional service, searching out the absolute truth doesn't mean anything. That is the absolute truth. Why would you keep searching? That is. So there's the process of searching, of neti, not this, not that, that's no longer needed. So it should be given up. Take full shelter of devotional service. See, one who is transcendentally situated at once realizes Supreme Brahman, becomes fully joyful. He never laments nor desires to have anything. He attains pure devotional service to me. So there's no desire for anything, no desire for knowledge, no desire for some of the other things that people desire. Prestige, power, fame, to be adored, to be honored. Those things, they don't desire any of those things. It's not that they don't desire, they desire to be engaged fully in devotional service to the Lord. Can't get enough of that. It's not that there's no desire, there's just no material desire. And even the process of trying to seek out the absolute truth, they don't even desire that, to engage in that anymore, because they're fully satisfied in devotional service. See, one must analyze one's existence. In trying to attain to the transcendental platform, you have to analyze, why am I suffering? What's the nature of this world? What's the difference between spirit and matter? One has to analyze. Okay, that's a certain amount of that will go on, more or less, according to the individual's what the individual needs to do. Some individuals will analyze quite a bit, and others might not analyze so much and be able to just dive into devotional service. But others may need to analyze quite a bit. So that's all right. The books are there. And whatever's favorable for devotional service, that's what we do. And whatever's unfavorable, that's what we don't do. Those are the two rules, two basic rules. Rupa Goswami has said those are really the only two rules. Everything else is a corollary. How one goes about following those two rules: accept everything favorable for Krishna, reject everything unfavorable for Krishna consciousness or devotional service. How one goes about that can be according to time, place, circumstance, the culture, the person's background, how they're entangled. There may be specific prescriptions, but that's the basic. Accept everything favorable for serving Krishna, reject everything unfavorable. So, one must analyze one's existence. When one is actually engaged in devotional service, you should not bother seeking out knowledge. Simply by engaging in devotional service undeviatingly, one will always remain in a liberated condition. Now, for preaching, if one is trying to present the messages of Godhead, there still may be some researching and some seeking out, but that then becomes one's devotional service. There's a difference between having doubts and being in ignorance and trying to get knowledge for one's own self, and that is Brahma Jigyasa, on the way to transcendence, and being in a transcendental position, already engaged in devotional service, fully surrendered to the conclusion that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and I'm his servant. Now how do I engage in the Lord's service? What does he want me to do? Let me take shelter of his pure devotees. So being situated in that way, and then being required for one's service to do some research. But that's different. So that's not what's being said here, that one should just engage in devotional service and just forget about knowledge. No, knowledge is there. Knowledge is meant to serve Krishna. And in the hands of the devotee, knowledge is a great asset for presenting messages of Godhead. So there's a difference. Well, what's being recommended here to give up is one's own self, being in doubt, in ignorance, in confusion, and searching out knowledge for one's own self. That can be given up when one is engaged in devotional service. Then that kind of pursuit of knowledge is no longer necessary. The unflinching execution of devotional service is in itself Brahmabhuta. One should not be simply intent on consulting books, but should simultaneously execute the spiritual master's order. So whatever that order is coming from the spiritual master, that supersedes trying to get some knowledge out of books. Actually, the spiritual master's order supersedes everything. Mystic power should be achieved to enable one to give up material conception. That's yoga. So in the first, comes under jnana, or knowledge. See, this is jnana and yoga. So by jnana, one realizes spiritual nature. By yoga, one can realize the Paramatma. So one is actually engaged in devotional service, does not need jnana or yoga. They're engaged in bhakti yoga. Even those who are liberated, Atmarama, must always engage in devotional service. Simply being on the transcendental platform with detached from the body and the mind is not enough. Because then what are the activities of the soul? The activities of the soul are service. So service, serving who? Serving what? Serving the personality of Godhead. So just being on the liberated platform is not enough, and there is every possibility of sliding back down into material activities, material engagement, because that's the nature of the soul, is to be active. Spiritual energy is alive and active, and desires cannot be given up completely. They have to be purified in relationship with the Supreme Pure Spirit. So all other activities of self-realization, including yoga and philosophical speculation, may be given up. But devotional service must be retained at all times. That's the super excellence of devotional service. There's nothing temporary about devotional service. And Krishna explains that naha vikrama nasosti javayo na vijite, or something like that. Swapamapyasya dharmasya, or something like that. So, but what he's saying is, in this endeavor, there's no loss or diminution, and a little advancement on this path protects one from the greatest type of fear. And the greatest danger, the greatest fear, is that the human being will slide back down through repeated birth and death in the different species and miss the opportunity of human life to become self-realized, spiritually self-realized. That's the greatest danger. So devotional service is so powerful and so potent, so absolute, that even a little advancement in devotional service can protect one from sliding back down, so that one still has the opportunity, it's still available to them to make advancement spiritually. They won't slide back down through the lower species who have really they don't have the capacity. They just have to go through the cycles of repeated birth and death until they get another opportunity by the mercy of a pure devotee. They don't have that ability to comprehend and reflect on the nature of the self, as apart from the body. So even a little participation in devotional life, devotional activities. It's said that the holy name is so powerful that if a person says it even once, they get eternal benefit. So what to speak of those who are practicing, taking shelter of, chanting, hearing, praying, meditating. It's never lost, and furthermore, it accumulates. If there is some interruption, one person takes up where they left off, when they resume their devotional practice, devotional services. So there's no loss. It's all good. Text 15. Vyāsadeva speaking to his sons. If one is serious about going back home, back to Godhead, he must consider the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the summum bonum, the chief aim of life. If he's a father instructing his sons, a spiritual master instructing his disciples, or a king instructing his citizens, he must instruct them as I have advised. Without being angry, he should continue giving instructions, even if his disciple, son, or citizen is sometimes unable to follow his order. Ignorant people who engage in pious and impious activities should be engaged in devotional service by all means. They should always avoid fruitive activity. If one puts into the bondage of karmic activity his disciple, son, or citizen who is bereft of transcendental vision, how will one profit? It's like leading a blind man to a dark well, causing him to fall in. So without being angry, he should continue to give instructions, even if they're unable to follow the order. So this anger, has to be curtailed. Anger means attachment to results. So if someone is attached to Krishna, they won't be attached to the results, because the results belong to Krishna. So they won't be victimized by anger. When anger is there, then there's some bewilderment of memory. One forgets Krishna. If you look at anger, what is it? I wanted something and I didn't get it, and I'm angry. So the problem is, I wanted something. But if all I want is to please Krishna, I'll always be able to try to please Krishna. I'll know when Krishna is not pleased, but it won't make me angry. Just make me pray more. Can't even become angry with yourself. Anger's a no-no. No anger. Well, there are times when anger has been used, like Hanuman, a great devotee of the Lord's incarnation as Lord Ramachandra, became very angry at Ravana and burnt his whole city down. So sometimes there is room for anger. And I believe Balaram became angry at Rukmi when he was cheating. He was scorning and laughing. I think he knocked all his teeth out or something. These are spiritual pastimes, not to be imitated. It's not on the material platform. This anger, there is a place for anger. But not in instructing the conditioned souls and trying to engage people who are in ignorance. There's anger on the spiritual platform in relationship to Krishna. Radharani becomes angry for different reasons. She becomes angry at Krishna. That's a spiritualized emotion on transcendental platform. But when the devotee is in contact with the unfortunate souls who are identifying with the material body, and they have some shortcoming, they can't come up to a certain standard, or they're bewildered in a certain way, or they can't follow the instructions of the spiritual master, to become angry is not going to help. Depend on Krishna. Always depend on Krishna. Krishna gives good guidance, he gives counseling, and he very often appears himself to correct situations. He works through his pure devotees by his mystic potency. We can see in the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya how potent all the associates and devotees were. I was just reading about Haridas Thakur in Advaita Prakash. And he was so powerful. He transformed people just by his presence. Just by asking them to chant Hare Krishna, just hearing that from his lips, because he was a pure devotee of the Lord, they immediately understood, wow, yes, Krishna, of course. They gave up worship of demigods, they gave up prostitution. Some people that approached him were suffering in material conditions with blindness, lameness, disease, because they took shelter of the pure devotee and they surrendered to Krishna by hearing from him. Their diseases disappeared, their lameness went away, their blindness went away. Those things are reactions of past karma. So one becomes free from karma and one surrenders to the Lord. Sometimes there's a residual reaction from past activities, but the potency of the Lord's devotee is so absolute, and the living entity is not a material body, it's a spiritual body. So there can be some great miracles by the mercy of the pure spirit soul, servant of the Lord. So if the Lord becomes angry, like Parashuram, his incarnation is Parashuram, and he's a Brahmin, but he acts as a Kshatriya, and he kills the ruling class, not just once, but I believe he had to come back and do it 21 times because they were such rascals. That's another thing. But for the devotee, trying to serve the Lord and being in contact with the conditioned souls, to become consumed by anger is not what Vyāsadeva is recommending here. He's recommending to avoid that at all costs. And it is in relationship to someone who's trying to surrender. He says here, the son. So a father is instructing the son, and the son is having difficulty following. For the father to become angry, should not do that. Or the king against the citizens. He's giving good instruction, they're having difficulty following. Should not become angry. should try to help them avoid fruitive activity. And Krishna will give good intelligence how to guide them in the spirit of devotion. Krishna talks about that in the Gita, that the minds of those who are too attached to material activity should not be disturbed. So to become angry is very disturbing. But they should be engaged in the spirit of devotion. So if someone is subordinate, to become angry at their inability to do something is not helpful. What's needed is proper guidance. And that proper guidance is to see how to engage them in the spirit of devotion. And Krishna says that in Gita also. He gives the topmost thing, to surrender completely. But then if you can't do that, person can't do that, then you should cultivate knowledge. Person can't cultivate knowledge, then they should... There's a long list he gives there of, you should do this. If you can't do this, then do that. If you can't do that, then do this. And there's a long list. And the idea is the person should be engaged somehow or other in the spirit of devotion. And then they'll make progress. So sometimes they can't be engaged in the spirit of devotion, and Krishna comes like Lord Nrsingadev and just sort of gives that living entity liberation by killing him directly. He can't engage in devotion, and he's causing a problem for everyone, especially for the devotees. So this is how we'll deal with it. Just comes and personally liberates them by killing them. So that's how the atheist meets the Lord, is through death. And they have to surrender that way. So, yeah, in the spirit of devotion. He says, you should always avoid fruitive activity. If one puts into bondage of karmic activity his disciple, a son or a citizen, who's bereft of transcendental vision, how will one profit? It's like leading a blind man to a dark well and causing him to fall in. So it's the duty and the responsibility of the guardian, whoever it may be, the father, the spiritual master, the head of state, to guide those who don't have that transcendental vision in the spirit of devotion. That's a responsibility that comes along. For a human being is a life of responsibility. So persons who are less intelligent become angry. So they're not qualified really to be in those positions, because they become angry. They're not qualified. Prabhupada's commentary, short purport. Stated in Bhagavad Gita, let not... Jai, Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. I didn't look at this. Honestly, I didn't look at this. Thank you, Prabhupada. That maybe, maybe I might actually be getting it. Let not the wise disrupt the minds of the ignorant who are attached to fruit of action. They should be encouraged not to refrain from work, but to work in the spirit of devotion. Haribol. Hare Krishna. Jai. Text 16. Due to ignorance, the materialistic person does not know anything about his self-interest, the auspicious path in life. He's simply bound to material enjoyment by lusty desires, and all his plans are made for this purpose. For temporary sense gratification, such a person creates a society of envy, and due to this mentality, he plunges into the ocean of suffering. Such a foolish person does not even know about this. Prabhupada's commentary. The word nasta drishti means one who has no eyes to see the future is very significant in this verse. Life goes on from one body to another, and the activities performed in this life are enjoyed or suffered in the next life, if not later in this life. One who is unintelligent, has no eyes to see the future, simply creates enmity and fights with others for sense gratification. As a result, one suffers in the next life, but due to being like a blind man, he continues to act in such a way that he suffers unlimitedly. Such a person is a muda, one who simply wastes his time, does not understand the Lord's devotional service. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, I am never manifest to the foolish and unintelligent. For them uncovered my eternal creative potency, Yogamaya, and the deluded world knows me not, who am unborn and infallible. In the Katha Upanishad is also said, although ignorant people still go to other blind men for leadership, as a result, both are subjected to miserable condition. The blind lead the blind into a ditch. Does not know anything about real self-interest. Think that sense enjoyment is all there is. So, the laws of the state are there to regulate this sense enjoyment, and sometimes they follow those laws and sometimes they don't, because the sense enjoyment is all that really matters. That's why simply making rules and laws doesn't work, because the underlying desire is contaminated. So when that underlying desire is purified, so that the only goal in life is sense gratification, in its many forms, gross and subtle, when that is purified out, then the laws will be more in tune with the goal of life, engaging in a spirit of devotion. And that's actually good leadership. So this is Maharaj Rishabhdev instructing his sons, who will be taking over leadership of the planet. Text 17. If someone is ignorant and addicted to the path of samsara, how can one who is actually learned, merciful, and advanced in spiritual knowledge engage him in fruitive activity and thus further entanglement in material existence? If a blind man's walking down the wrong path, how can a gentleman allow him to continue on his way to danger? How can he approve this method? No wise or kind man can allow this. No purport on that. Text 18. One who cannot deliver his dependents from the path of repeated birth and death should never become a spiritual master, a father, a husband, a mother, or a worshipful demigod. That's a strong order. Which means the reason one would take up any of those services is to deliver their dependent. If they can't do that, then they shouldn't take up that service, because human life is a life of responsibility. And that is the responsibility, is to perfect human life by developing love of God, loving devotional service to the Lord, returning home back to Godhead. So that is the perfection of that sense of duty. One has duty or responsibility. So we don't really see that very much in the society at large. Not very much. Mostly people are simply born out of lust, sense gratification, mostly. So what happens is the population is kind of wild because the mentality of the parents is what attracts the particular soul that takes birth there. So if it's very lusty, then it just perpetuates itself, generation after generation. And unfortunately, it degrades. It doesn't even stay at that level. It degrades. So, but just the opposite is there for peaceful running of human society and reaching the goal of life. Just the opposite is there. Responsible parents who know their responsibility and duty toward their children. Spiritual master who knows his responsibility toward his disciples is to deliver them. If he can't do that, he shouldn't become a spiritual master. Shouldn't become a father. Or a mother. There are many spiritual masters, Prabhupada's commentary. There are many spiritual masters, but Rishabhadeva advises one should not become a spiritual master if he's unable to save his disciple from the path of birth and death. Unless one is a pure devotee of Krishna, he cannot save himself from the path of repeated birth and death. Tattva dehan punarjanma naitimam iti sorjuna. One cannot stop birth and death only by returning home. One can stop birth and death only by returning home back to Godhead. However, who can go back to Godhead unless he understands the Supreme Lord in truth? Janma karma chamedivyam evam yo veti tattvataha. There's more to the purport, but this particular section here, unless one is a pure devotee of Krishna, he cannot save himself from the path of repeated birth and death. Now, you can't give what you don't have. So, if a person isn't even saved himself, is not on the platform of pure devotional service, how can he possibly give it to anyone else? So why would such a person become a spiritual master? So Rishabhadeva is advising against that kind of thing. We have many instances in history illustrating Rishabhadeva's instructions. Shukracharya was rejected by Bali Maharaj due to his inability to save Bali Maharaj from the path of repeated birth and death. Shukracharya was not a pure devotee. He was more or less inclined to fruitive activity, and he objected when Bali Maharaj promised to give everything to Lord Vishnu. Now there's a perfect example. Shukracharya is a very powerful mystic, and undoubtedly he was well versed in the scriptures. But he was inclined toward fruitive activity. He was acting as the spiritual master of Bali Maharaj, And which means he was depending, the way he was doing it was, he was depending on Bali Maharaj for his living, for his sustenance. And undoubtedly he was probably living quite well, being the spiritual master of a king. So I'm sure he was compensated quite nicely. And along with whatever money and goods he had, no doubt he had a lot of prestige. He was very influential. A lot of adoration and distinction going on there, as well as profit. So there's fruitive mentality. And when Lord Vishnu personally appeared as a Brahmin boy, small Brahmin boy, dwarf Brahmin, before Bali Maharaj, he incarnated before Bali, because Bali was a great devotee, and gave Bali the opportunity to surrender completely, to become completely free from all material attachment, and enter into devotional service, go back home, back to Godhead. Sukracharya complained. He tried to stop it. No, don't do this. But he'll take everything, because he had that fruitive mentality, vested interest. He wasn't qualified to actually be a spiritual master of anyone because of his fruitive mentality. This is the perfect example right there. And Bali Maharaj didn't listen. He rejected such a so-called spiritual master, because Krishna gave him good intelligence from within. No, you surrender. Abandon all varieties of religionists, just surrender to me. I'd protect you. He was able to recognize the Lord there before him. It looks like Sukracharya also recognized the Lord, but he had no intention of surrendering. Devotion. It's like Kamsa, he also knew Vishnu and Krishna, but he had no intention of surrendering. He actually didn't like Krishna at all. He wanted to kill Krishna. Now, he had fruitive mentality to the max. He was actually a demon. We don't believe Sukracharya is mentioned as being a demon. He's just described as being contaminated with fruitive mentality that was blocking him from going back home, back to Godhead, and having devotional sentiment toward the Lord. Because his sentiment toward fruitive gain was too strong for him to surrender at that time. Actually, one's supposed to give everything to the Lord because everything belongs to the Lord. Consequently, Supreme Lord advised in Bhagavad Gita, Yad karosi yad asnasi, yad jahosi dadasi yat tapasya sikanteya tat kurushva madarpanam. O son of Kunti, all that you do, all that you eat, all that you offer and give away, as well as all austerities you may perform, should be done as an offering unto me. This is bhakti. This is Prabhupada's commentary. I'm going to read that again. O son of Kunti, all that you do, all that you eat, all you offer, give away, as well as all austerities you may perform, should be done as an offering unto me. This is bhakti. Unless one is devoted, he cannot give everything to the Supreme Lord. Unless one can do so, he cannot become a spiritual master, a husband, father, or mother. Similarly, the wives of the Brahmins who were performing sacrifices gave up their relatives just to satisfy Krishna. This is an example of a wife rejecting a husband who cannot deliver her from impending dangers of birth and death. Similarly, Prahlad Maharaj rejected his father, and Bharat Maharaj rejected his mother. The word Daivam indicates a demigod or one who accepts worship from a dependent. Ordinarily, the spiritual master, husband, father, mother, or superior relative accepts worship from an inferior relative. But here Rishabhdev forbids this. First, the father, spiritual master, or husband must be able to release the dependent from repeated birth and death. If he cannot do this, he plunges himself into the ocean of reproachment for his unlawful activities. Everyone should be responsible and take charge of his dependents just as a spiritual master takes charge of his disciples or a father takes charge of his son. All these responsibilities cannot be discharged honestly unless one can save the dependent from repeated birth and death. So, envy is a big problem on the path of devotion. You can see that enviousness blocks devotional sentiment. Envy means you have something that I don't. Now, purified, if we see someone has Krishna consciousness and we realize we don't envy them. We approach them and say, I want what you have. I'm not envious of you. I want you to give to me. And such a Krishna conscious person, devotee of the Lord, their Krishna consciousness isn't diminished if they give Krishna consciousness to someone else. Paradoxically, it increases. Because Krishna is pleased. Krishna wants to expand the family of devotees. He wants the living entities to come back home. He doesn't want them wandering around in the material energy indefinitely. So, when the living entity is through, they're no longer illusioned about thinking that they can be happy in the material nature, and they want to go back to Krishna, then Krishna is making all arrangements. So, but if a person is in a position of responsibility, but they have that envious mentality, which means false pride. In other words, if I see someone who has something that I don't, and it's something very valuable, if I'm falsely proud, I'll simply become angry and envious of the person. Because I have a kind of false pride that I do not want to be subordinate to anyone. So if they're happy, they have a lot of happiness, I become envious. Because if I don't have happiness, I become envious. Because somehow they're greater than I am because they have this valuable thing, this peacefulness and happiness. Or if they have a lot of wealth and I don't, then I become envious. They have something that I don't have because I'm falsely proud about who I think I am. I'm so important and I don't want to be subordinate to anyone. And so these are different ways to try to understand this problem of enviousness. So if someone's in a position of responsibility, like for instance we see the example of Prahlad Maharaj and his father Hiranyakashipu. Hiranyakashipu was extremely envious. He was envious of Krishna. As Krishna is all-powerful, like this, and eternal, doesn't die. So he's so envious. Instead of approaching Krishna to get those things by surrendering to the Lord, recognizing that the Lord's qualities are attractive, opulence, wealth, and to enter into association with such a wonderful person through devotional service, instead become envious. False sense of pride, my self-importance, and feeling threatened by someone who has valuable things that I don't have. So he's in a position of being a father for Prahlad Maharaj, who is a devotee of the Lord, a pure devotee. So that envy is there to such a degree that they wanted to kill his son. So envious, so falsely proud. So not everyone is a big Hiranyakashipu, but there may be tinges of that spirit, that bad spirit, that we see fully manifest in Hiranyakashipu. So there's lots of little Hiranyakashipus who are fathers and mothers, spiritual masters, heads of state. They have that false pride. It's very important to them that they be recognized for their greatness. And so they're envious. They have a lot of envy. And they therefore can't help anyone because they can't even help themselves. So when we look at the Brahmins and the wives of the Brahmins, when Krishna and Balaram's little cowherd friends came to beg some food from them, the wives recognized the personality of Godhead. And they took the food that was meant for the sacrifices and the offerings and gave them to Krishna. Whereas the Brahmins themselves, see, they had that little bit of pride in there. They were very important. We're Brahmins, we're performing these sacrifices. We have that false pride. And they couldn't give anything to Krishna because they were suffering from that false pride, which is a subtle form of envy of Krishna. No one's greater than Krishna. No one's equal to Krishna. Everyone is a servant of Krishna. So it's there to one degree or another in the conditioned state. And such a conditioned soul cannot perform their duties and responsibilities toward their subordinates properly or nicely. So Vyāsadeva is instructing his sons about these matters for the smooth running of the state when he leaves. So I think we'll leave off there. And refreshing in the morning to dive into these messages of Godhead. And then whatever it is we have to deal with during the day, we deal with it, do the best we can. We can always chant, at least under our breath, if not loud on a street corner. And we can know that the Hare Krishna movement is alive and well and is going on in every town and village. The bells are ringing. The charmers are waving. The chanting is going on. And devotees are doing the best they can to make as much advancement as they can. And like Vyāsadeva says, if they don't come up to some standard, to become angry is useless. We should always just engage in the spirit of devotion, and Krishna will correct the situation. I mean, Arjuna was instructed to fight in the spirit of devotion. He was killing people in the spirit of devotion. That's a little extreme. As I said, we don't imitate these things. But it's the spirit of devotion is what will save us from the illusory energy. So as they say in Vrindavan, Jaya Radhe. Hare Krishna.